Hello, my name is Clemente Lisi. Thank you for joining me today on our live stream on the World Cup, World Cup 101, how it works and why it matters. Like I said, my name is Clemente Lisi. I've been a journalist for about 30 years now. I'm currently the executive editor of a website called religionunplugged.com. I have worked at various newspapers in my time as a journalist. I've worked at the New York Post and the New York Daily News. I worked at ABC News. I am also the author of the FIFA World Cup, History of the Planet's Biggest Sporting Event, which was published in 2022, right before the World Cup in Qatar. You can get that book on Amazon and other places where books are sold. Also, I have here a photograph of myself at the World Cup in 2018. I've covered the last four World Cups in person. 2018 World Cup was in Russia, and I was in Moscow and in St. Petersburg for the last knockout phases of the World Cup, including the World Cup final, which was won by France over Croatia. So the FIFA World Cup, what is it? I'm sure many of you joining us know what the World Cup is and the magnitude of the World Cup. But for many people, every 4 years, more and more people get to know what the World Cup is. New generations learn what it is, and new sports fans, new soccer fans, new football fans learn about the World Cup, and many people become soccer fans because of the World Cup. So, what is the World Cup? It's the planet's premier soccer competition, or as football, as most people around the world would say. It is held every 4 years. Side note: the next World Cup will be held in 2026 in North America. It will be co-hosted by the United States, Mexico, and Canada. It is the first time three nations will host the World Cup. It is organized by FIFA, which is the international governing body of soccer. FIFA controls every aspect of the sport from the amateur level all the way to the World Cup level, national team level, and all the leagues in between. FIFA oversees the rules, the governance of the sport, and through every national federation. So every country has its own national federation. FIFA has about 209 members around the world, including countries like the United States and Russia and Italy, Brazil, Argentina, to the smallest countries in the world, including San Marino. So that's what what FIFA is, and FIFA organizes the World Cup, as I said. The first World Cup was held in 1930 in Uruguay. So the World Cup will turn 100 in 8 years. Well, less than 8 years, in 6 years. In 2030, will turn 100. So the World Cup has a long, long, rich history, which we'll talk about. And just so people are aware, many people are fans of the Premier League, Serie A, MLS, domestic leagues around the world, but the World Cup is only open to national teams. So the format and the structure. So I mentioned the qualification process usually takes 2.5 years. It involves over 200 nations. Uh, the finalists that reach the final stage of the World Cup, which will be held next year, is over a 5-week period, and 48 teams will qualify to the finals. That's from the previous number of 32. The World Cup has expanded massively over the last 90 plus years. You've seen, as little as 11 to 16 nations to 24 nations. Then there was a growth to 32 nations in 1998. And then for the first time, we'll have 48 nations starting in 2026, which will give an opportunity to a lot of countries that never qualified for the World Cup before a chance to attend, reach the World Cup. You will have nations, smaller nations, will have a chance to participate. You'll also have countries that have not been in the World Cup for a very long time, potentially qualifying again. And then, to the hope of many soccer fans who are neutral around the world, you'll have the big countries like Brazil, Argentina, Germany, Italy, Spain, France, the countries that usually contend for the trophy. How is it divided? It's subdivided into a group stage, right? The best teams from the group stage then emerge into a knockout round. There'll be a round of 32, which is new because to accommodate the more nations participating. Then you'll have a round of 16, the quarterfinals, semifinals, and the final, which will be played on July 19th at MetLife Stadium, which is located right outside New York City. So New York City will host the World Cup final for the first time in its history. So this is a slide of the qualified teams so far. So as you can tell from the gray boxes, there's still plenty of teams that need to qualify, and they will be doing so in the next, I say, 6 months. In addition to that, there will be a World Cup draw, final draw on December 5th in Washington, D.C. And at that draw, they will seed the teams and then put them in various groups. So you'll see where your country is, what group they'll be in, and that'll determine sort of who their first round opponents will be. As you can tell from the graphic, Canada, Mexico, and the United States are qualified automatically as host nations. And then you have a few of the Asian and South American teams are already qualified, like Japan and South Korea, which have qualified for many World Cups now. And then you have South American teams that are contending, including Argentina, the defending champion. In the previous slide, you saw a photo of Lionel Messi with the World Cup trophy. Argentina, you have Brazil, Uruguay. These are countries that have won the World Cup before. So an interesting mix of teams. You'll see in the next coming weeks and months, you'll see more teams from Africa and Europe qualifying. You don't really have any European teams qualifying because the UEFA qualifying process is still going on, and you'll see countries like France, Spain, Germany, Portugal. Those countries will start to qualify in the coming months. So, like as I mentioned, the World Cup will be held in North America. First time three countries will host the World Cup. The World Cup in the past has been hosted by two nations, South Korea, Japan being the first one in 2002. So it will be held in two cities in Canada, as you see it from the graphic, and then three cities in Mexico. But really, the bulk of the games and the matches will be held in the United States, really across the country. Places like Atlanta, Boston, Dallas, Kansas City, Los Angeles, New York, Miami, the Bay Area, which is San Francisco, Seattle. So really all over the country. Really a chance for everyone in the United States and North America to travel across the country to visit the various host cities, but also a chance for people from all the parts of the world to attend, obviously, and then also geographically to be as diverse as possible. One sort of footnote here, there's some cities missing from the hosting process, which is a very, very complicated but also very competitive process. City like Chicago is not hosting a World Cup match, Chicago being a very big city, and the other one being Washington, D.C., which is the capital. For the first time in World Cup history, a country's capital will not be hosting the World Cup. Though Mexico City, which is the capital of Mexico, will be hosting matches, but no games in Washington or Chicago. I mentioned that because those two cities did host matches in 1994, which is the last time the United States hosted the World Cup, which was the first time. So, a brief history of the World Cup. I mentioned it's almost 100 years old. We're heading towards the centennial of the World Cup. So, first one being held in 1930 in Uruguay. Why Uruguay? Well, at the time in the 1920s, Uruguay was probably the best and strongest football team in the world. They were the two-time Olympic champions, and so FIFA decided to have the World Cup hosted in Uruguay, and that's why Uruguay was the first host. And they were also the first champion. They won the World Cup that year at home in 1930. In terms of winners, the most titles ever. So Brazil is a five-time champion, has won the most World Cups of any nation. If you know anything about world soccer, world football, Brazil is probably the, the best soccer country in the world in terms of its prowess on the field, its potential, the players they've unleashed over the decades, including one of the greatest players of all time, Pelé, the 1950s and 60s, and culminating with the World Cup in 1970. And you have others like Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, Romario, many, many star players over the years that really have helped write the history of the World Cup. And you really can't talk about the World Cup or write about the World Cup or really, really do anything that's World Cup related without mentioning Brazil. Brazil is always a contender for the World Cup, and Brazil is also the only nation ever in World Cup history to qualify for every World Cup. So Brazil has been in every World Cup finals to date. Some recent winners. So we mentioned Argentina in 2022 in Qatar. They beat France in the final, 3-3 game that was resolved on penalty kicks. I was at that game. It probably was, if not the best World Cup final in history, one of the best. For sure, one of the best in modern times. And if you haven't seen that game, it's worth going back to rewatch it or rewatch the highlights on YouTube. Lionel Messi was able to win his first World Cup. It was Argentina's first World Cup since 1986, when they last won the World Cup with Diego Maradona, who is considered one of the best players of all time. And Messi now is sort of in that same pantheon of players. But going back a little further, 2018, I mentioned World Cup final in Moscow. France winning the World Cup with a very young 19-year-old Kylian Mbappe. I was there for that final as well, and it was pretty historic. France winning a second World Cup. And then prior to that, Germany won the World Cup in 2014. Uh, that tournament was held in Brazil. That was a Brazilian World Cup, and Germany reached the final, defeat Argentina in the final, but almost more notably to Brazilian fans, uh, Germany beat Brazil 7-1 in the semifinal, which remains one of the highest scoring games ever, but also one of the biggest humiliations in Brazilian soccer history. And you almost can't talk about their success without talking about some of their failures over the years. Um, but yeah, so Brazil would not win that World Cup at home. And then, there've been many, 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 many notable moments over a course of nearly 100 years. I have a photo here of, I mentioned the great Diego Maradona scoring one of the most famous goals in World Cup history against England in the quarterfinals of the 1986 World Cup. And this is a goal that Maradona scored with his hand. Uh, Now it's called the Hand of God goal. And it's famous for its trickery and for its cunning nature. England fans still upset by this many, many decades later. It's seen as one of the biggest cheating moves of all time, but also one of the most sort of passionate and sort of improvisational things ever done at a World Cup. I should mention that Argentina and England had been in a war a few years earlier, so of course there was extra tension to that game. But yeah, this is a famous goal. And then I should also mention that Maradona scored probably the most beautiful goal at a World Cup in the same game, where he beat six players and scored against Peter Shilton. So he scored a goal that is a cheating goal, and then the second goal being probably the most beautiful goal ever. And it's worth rewatching that goal over and over again just to see the finesse, the technique, the talent that Maradona had, and this ability to dribble the ball in a way that maybe very few players can. And maybe the only one that could do it is Messi, who is sort of his countryman and someone who many people see to be very similar to Maradona. So I mentioned that one moment, but there's so many moments, and maybe in the question and answer afterwards, we can talk about some of your favorite moments. That is one of my favorite moments, just because as a neutral, I'm not an Argentina fan, I'm not from Argentina, but just the hand of God goal, and then also the other goal that he scored in that same game is truly remarkable. So this presentation really is about why the World Cup matters, right? In addition to what it is, and why does it matter? Well, the last World Cup in 2022 in Qatar engaged 5 billion people around the world. Now, there's very few things around the world where most people could agree on. And the love for football, the love for soccer, the passion that the World Cup brings is unique. In a world that is very fragmented on social media, everyone is interested in their own hobbies and their own activities. This still remains something that transcends everything. And I would argue that with the growth of technology, the World Cup has only grown. The World Cup was small in its scope, and then radio helped grow it. Then television was a massive boost to the World Cup, first black and white, then color. Now the internet and streaming, and really all corners of the globe. During the World Cup, the world pretty much stops, and people around the world will watch at least one game, if not more. People will take time off from work. Kids will watch the World Cup in school in various countries around the world, whether their country's involved or not. It really does bring people together. This photo you see here is one of the fan fests that was in Moscow. I fondly remember people in Russia just flooding the streets, watching on large screens, visitors from all around the world watching the World Cup. Neutral fans, but of course, Russian fans are cheering for Russia, who did very well at that World Cup, and being at home often helps. And then just seeing so many Brazilians, Argentines, Colombians, the French were there. Obviously, by the time the final came around, and just to see a whole mix of people around the world is fun. And the World Cup brings people together. And like so I said, 5 billion people engaged with the World Cup in 2022. The final alone was watched by 1.5 billion people. That's with a B. Watched the final alone in 2022, and that number has grown with every World Cup. And not just because it was a very good game. If the game had been terrible, you still would have had a large crowd watching on television, on streaming, on large screens, at the stadium. Any way they can engage with the final. My book says the FIFA World Cup is the planet's largest sporting event, which some people try to push back on by saying, "Well, what about the Super Bowl in the United States, or what about the Olympics? Those are bigger. Those are not bigger by size. The Super Bowl may average, 100 million fans, in the US and in North America, and maybe parts around the world, maybe 120 million. The World Cup is still 1.5 billion, right? The Olympics will engage, and the Olympics, there's a multitude of sports, both summer and winter, will engage maybe hundreds of millions of fans, but not billions, not 1.5 billion for a final. So it's bigger than the Super Bowl, it's bigger than the Olympics. The organizers like to say that the next World Cup with 48 teams will have 104 matches. That 104 games is almost like 104 Super Bowls. Every game will be that important to the teams playing, and every game is important, especially when you're playing a group stage and you need to qualify for the next round. And at that point is a single elimination. So the games, you have to have a winner. So if games end in a draw, they go to extra time. So every game is high stakes, and statistically, it has shown if you lose the first game of the World Cup, often qualifying out of your group is very difficult. Now, I know some teams have done that, including Spain in 2010, and they won the final. And then 2022, let's not forget, Argentina lost to Saudi Arabia in the first game and still was able to reach the final. So it's possible, but every game is that important. And then my last bullet really shows about the massive cultural reach, like this photo shows, people from all around the world gathering to talk about the one thing that they have in common is this love for this game that they played as a child or they watched on television, and they watch their club teams every week, and then they have national pride in their country. And so the World Cup brings all that together, and people, it brings people together. I have lots of stories about traveling to the last four World Cups, and it doesn't matter who you meet. If you say you're there for the World Cup, I remember when I was in Moscow for the World Cup, for example, in my hotel, there were people from all over the world, including this couple from Jamaica, and they were there to watch the World Cup, and they were, just big soccer fans. Even though Jamaica had been long eliminated, they had planned their vacation around going to the semifinals and the final. And a lot of people I know at the World Cup have said to me, "Oh yeah, we save up for 4 years to try to go to the next World Cup. We don't go on vacation for 4 years, but we want to go to the World Cup. We want to go to a World Cup game. We want to be there for the final. We want to be there for the semifinals. We want to make a family trip out of it," which is, tells you really about the importance of it, that people will plan their lives around this. This large cultural impact is only part of the story. It's also a huge economic impact. So in 2026, when the World Cup will be held in the United States, Canada, and Mexico, it's already being said by FIFA and by others, independent experts, that this will be probably the most successful World Cup and probably the World Cup that makes the most amount of money, right? It brings in billions of dollars in tourism, sponsorship, of the players, of the teams. Companies like Adidas and Nike will be very much involved. You have multinational brands that will be involved. All this will help generate lots of money. And as the graphic says here, the World Cup is really a FIFA cash cow. The money that FIFA makes from the World Cup, they distribute that money around the world to help grow the game in other countries and build the infrastructure needed to be able to host a World Cup every 4 years. So I should point out, FIFA is a nonprofit. All the money that it makes, it tries to then give back to grow the game. And the World Cup has become a huge, huge financial gain, not just for FIFA, but for the sponsors involved, and for many, many of these companies that are involved with the game. And the sport has grown tremendously over the last 40 years, and so has the business around the World Cup. So you'll see a lot of countries want to host the World Cup because not just does it help their finances, even though you spend a lot of money too. I got my second point points out infrastructure. You have to build stadiums in some cases. You have to build train systems, transportation, hotels. Some places are better than others, obviously, in terms of having those things. But it forces countries to invest in infrastructure, right? And so that's also a big because you want to be able to get visitors and tourists and travelers around. And oftentimes those things are a legacy of the World Cup, right? If you build a train, if you build more hotels, if you build more stadiums, those things last even afterwards. And then there's short term and long term economic benefits, obviously, hosting the World Cup. And I mentioned some of those now. Short term, you have all these visitors coming to your country, it helps everybody. And the long term, you build stadiums, you build training centers, and you help grow the game. I mentioned 1994, the United States hosted the World Cup. The US has tremendous infrastructure, obviously, public transportation, state of the art stadiums that were built for the NFL and for football, American football that are used for soccer sometimes. But in that case, it was helping to grow the game in the United States. The United States, not known as a soccer nation, I would say that now 30 years later, it is one. But in 1994, it really wasn't. And so some of the things that helped grow the game to grow its impact was they needed to create better infrastructure around the game, training centers, more parks for children. But in addition to that, a professional soccer league, right? And so Major League Soccer was born, which is the professional first division soccer league of the United States, which was created in 1996, 2 years after the World Cup. And it really has helped grow soccer in the United States, but also helped develop players. So now you see American players playing all around the world, including in Europe. I mentioned a few. Christian Pulisic plays at AC Milan in Italy. You have Weston McKennie plays for Juventus, also in Italy. You have many other players who play in the Premier League, in France, in Germany, in Spain, and many other countries. So that helps grow the game, and that's a big economic impact also for the United States long term. So these things are all attached. The World Cup may just come to your city or to your country for 4 weeks once every 4 years, but there's a lot of legacy, a lot of growth around it before and after. So culturally, right? So no matter where I've been around the world, and I mentioned that I've met fans, I've met other journalists. I mentioned in my book that some of the most knowledgeable people when it comes to football, soccer, are taxi drivers. And of course, you need taxi drivers to get you from the airport to the hotel, or to get you sometimes from the hotel to the stadium or to the training facility. So sometimes as a journalist, you're running around, and I will say I mentioned Moscow, wonderful wonderful subway system. I'm from New York. I appreciate a good subway. I love the subway in Moscow. Apologies for that, technical difficulties. I'm back. So I was saying, you need, so taxi drivers are often very good at, getting you places, but they also want to talk about soccer. They want to talk about football. They ask you, where are you from? You tell them, I'm from the United States. Why are you here? Oh, I'm here for the World Cup. And then there you go. You start talking about soccer. And because I think maybe they talk to so many people, listen to the radio, they're just very knowledgeable on the sport. So I found that speaking to taxi drivers about the World Cup has always been one of the things I like to do most, and it's a lot of fun. And many of them, can speak English obviously because of tourism, and so they talk a little bit about soccer, about their national team, and their favorite players. But what am I getting at? The culturally, what does that mean? It means we have a shared experience, right? like I mentioned, in a fragmented world where so few people have things in common, this remains a constant. The love of this game, right? Watch parties. I mentioned the watch parties, like whether you're watching them at home with your family and your friends, or you're at your local pub or bar or restaurant, right? Watching it as a group, or for example, you're at a fan fest or at the stadium, right? So there's a shared communal experience. And I was in London 2 years last year for a family vacation, and it was during the Euros, the European Championship, and England was playing, and my daughter and I decided to why watch it in the hotel room when you can go to a local restaurant and watch with people there, and it's a lot more fun to watch England play, you know, uh, in a restaurant in England, in London, while everyone is cheering for their national team. So that was a fun experience, even though the tournament wasn't being held there. It was a communal experience, and that's the kind of thing I think you're going to see in the United States and Mexico and Canada, but really around the world come World Cup time this summer. And then, you have various players that have become superstars, global names, right? Because of this sport. So I mentioned the three that I have here. I've already mentioned in the first slide is Diego Maradona, who unfortunately passed away in 2020. One of the greatest soccer players of all time, in my opinion, and really sort of an amazing, amazing personality. You have his countryman, also from Argentina, Lionel Messi. He is probably one of the most famous people on earth, in terms of celebrity, right? And then in the last slide, you have Pele, who's I mentioned him earlier. He's also passed away. The greatest soccer player of all time, or among the greatest soccer players of all time. And these are all people that will be recognized anywhere on any street in the world. Um, and they're household names. You mentioned these names, and I would mention also one more name, Cristiano Ronaldo, who I think has the most Instagram followers of anybody on the planet, right? So that tells you about the reach that soccer players, football players have with people around the world. So it's truly amazing to see that these athletes who are so good at this sport become household names. And if you go to Argentina, or if you're from Argentina, I remember for years people would say, "Oh, they would just say, oh, they would say Maradona." But they would, to say, I understand what country you're coming from, or where you're from. I'm sure now people will say Messi, and that will be, a common thing to, create a bond between people. So some challenges and criticism, of course, there's been some corruption at FIFA over the years. There's been environmental concerns. Obviously, when you have so many people, at a World Cup, it's always an issue. And then, there's always politics involved with everything in life, including sports. So that has been an issue sometimes as well. So those are things that, you have to be aware of when you talk about the World Cup. It reaches every part of life, every part of society. And that's sort of something that you have to keep in mind when you talk about the World Cup. And I'm sure the United States will have its challenges, and so will Mexico and Canada. But generally, soccer is a unifying force and brings people together, which is why it's so amazing, so beautiful. Okay, so I guess takeaway, why does it matter, right? Why does the World Cup matter? So it brings people together, and I love this photo of fans from all around the world. This was also taken in Moscow. Fans from all around the world, Colombia, Uruguay, it doesn't matter, right? People from all over the world getting together, to cheer their team and to show respect for other teams. So, and if you're a neutral, meaning that your country's been eliminated, your country didn't qualify for the World Cup, or maybe your country's not that good at football, you can pick a country. You can become a Brazil fan, you could become an Argentina fan, a France fan, just for a summer, and cheer for those teams. Uh, what does the World Cup do? Why does it matter? It inspires youth. It promotes physical activity, which is very important in our sedentary culture. And then it drives cultural exchange. Like I mentioned, this photo is an awesome representation of just the people that come together at a World Cup. I know I've mentioned that before here, but I do think it's really important. Um, an amazing thing to have these people come together every 4 years, when you normally would not see that in any other parts of the world, but you do see that at the World Cup level. So, um, thank you for taking the time to listen to my presentation, talk about the World Cup, why it matters, why it's important. And yes, I see some questions coming in, so I'm going to take a few questions. I guess the first question is, did you like the World Cup that was held in Russia? I loved it. I loved the World Cup in Russia. I loved that it was there. It was the first time Russia ever hosted a World Cup. So this is what FIFA's been trying to do to grow the games, to have it in places that you normally would not have it, right? And the beautiful thing about having it in Russia was you were having it for the first time in a country that not just is in Europe, because the World Cup has been held in Europe many, many times, but also extends into Asia. Right, so a country that spans two continents. One of the best train rides I took in my life was going from Moscow to St. Petersburg. And St. Petersburg is an amazing city, especially if you like writing and writers and that part of Russian history, Russian literature. I mean, it's so the World Cup is more than just soccer for me. When I travel around the world, I want to really immerse myself in the culture. And it was fun to really immerse myself in some Russian culture for a while and some Russian food we talked about. And I should mention that my parents are from Italy. It's probably where I got my love for soccer, and the Russians love Italian music and Italian culture. So it was a really fun cultural exchange for me. So I did love the World Cup being in Russia, and hope one day that it returns. Um, the other question: where who will get the Ballon d'Or today, and what do you think? Oh, this is always a very tough question because everyone has their favorites for the Ballon d'Or. People that don't know, the Ballon d'Or is given to the best player who plays in Europe, so it's open to players from around the world, but you have to be playing in Europe in a European team. On the men's side, this is. I never thought Rodri from Manchester City would win the Ballon d'Or last year, and he did. It was a sort of a odd choice. I think, it's going to be really tight between someone like a Lamine Yamal, who is an amazing athlete. He plays for Spain. He's only 19 years old now. I think he's been playing for 2 years. He's just a kid, but has a tremendous future. I think it will be somewhere between him or Mohamed Salah, who plays for Liverpool, amazing player. Would only be the second African player to ever win the Ballon d'Or if he does win it. The first one was one in the 90s by George Weah of Liberia, played for AC Milan back then. So I think it's between these two players, but I'm always wrong. It's going to be somebody else, probably a total surprise, somebody else that I'm not thinking of, and that's probably who's going to win the Ballon d'Or. But stay tuned for that. It's always fun to see who wins that. Uh, what was the best World Cup? Good question. So when the 2018 World Cup ended, Gianni Infantino announced that the World Cup in Russia was the best World Cup ever. Okay. 4 years later, 2022, Qatar, the World Cup final was over, and Gianni Infantino proclaimed that was the best World Cup ever. So the best World Cup ever is always the last one. That's what FIFA looks at it, and I understand that at a marketing level. I have a few favorites of my own. The first World Cup I can remember, I was 6 years old, 1982 World Cup in Spain, won by Italy. I remember that World Cup. I was only 6, but I remember it very vividly. That was one of my favorite World Cups. 1986 in Mexico. Diego Maradona totally won the World Cup by himself, basically. That was one of my favorite World Cups. 1990 World Cup, I was 14. That was held in Italy. It was won by West Germany. I love that World Cup. I have to say, the World Cups I visited, I think my favorite one is South Africa 2010. I really enjoyed being there. Also, first time it was ever held in Africa. It was a pretty fun. 2010 is my favorite, but I have to say 2022 in Qatar was also pretty amazing, only because the final was so good. Uh, Next question. Football is my favorite sport, and I have a question: is European soccer popular in the U.S.? So it's becoming popular. It's growing. Like I said, Major League Soccer really has helped grow the game because you have your own domestic league. But Americans, if you live in the United States and you're watching this, you would be surprised at just how much football we can watch every weekend because of streaming services, because of Amazon and various streaming platforms, Peacock and CBS Sports. We can watch the Premier League, Serie A, Liga in France, the Bundesliga. You can watch leagues from Argentina and Brazil. I mean, you can watch soccer from. I mean, you can spend the whole weekend just watching soccer. So Americans are just getting used to watching a lot of football, and so I think that's making the fans smarter, but also children see that. They see domestic league and they see players from around the world in the European leagues, and the game is growing. Also, I should mention that there's immigrants from all over the world live in the United States, and their first love is not baseball or American football, but it's soccer, right? So yeah, I say yeah, and I think you will see this in the World Cup in the summer, just the growth of the game. And so I'll give you an example. There was a 10-day ticket window buying opportunity for the lottery to buy World Cup tickets. The majority of the people were from the United States that wanted tickets. And over 10 days, 4.5 million people applied for tickets. That's an insane amount of people. And so, yeah, it's going to be a pretty crazy World Cup. And I think you'll see that soccer has become very popular in the United States. You see the stadiums are going to be full next summer. Why do you think Pochettino, the head coach of the U.S. team, has had bad results. Now the squad is very good. Maybe the coach is not suitable for the team. And Chelsea Pochettino worked very well. Yeah. So Mauricio Pochettino is the U.S. coach. He's only been in the job for 1 year. The United States has a disadvantage of not qualifying for the World Cup through qualifiers. They qualify automatically. And so when you qualify automatically, you don't have a lot of chances to play competitive games. And I think he hasn't had a chance to play really competitive games. He's played a lot of friendlies. He's played the Gold Cup and some other tournaments, but really not at a high level. And so the US has a good young generation. I think the goal for the US is to go to the World Cup and get out of the first round, get out of the group stage. And that's always been the goal. And they've been able to do that the last few editions. Can they go further than that? I don't know. Pochettino is having a hard time. I think having a foreign coach is not easy in the United States. Now, you want to bring in a foreign coach because they have the most talent, the most skill, but it reminds me of when Jurgen Klinsmann was the coach in 2014. They reached the World Cup, then they didn't qualify for 2018. People forget the World Cup in Russia 2018. The United States did not qualify, right? And by that point, Jurgen Klinsmann had been fired. They hired Bruce Arena, who was an American who had coached the U.S. in the past, but could not qualify the team. So people have been saying, Pochettino should be fired. I think it's not a good opportunity to fire him now with 10 months to go before the World Cup. I think you stick with Pochettino, you work hard, you try to get as far as you can at the World Cup and see what happens. And if things don't work out, then you fire him afterwards. But maybe Pochettino is a better club manager. Maybe he's better at Chelsea, better in the Premier League than he would be at the national team level. It's possible. The national team and the club level is two different things. What books, resources would you recommend for being involved in football business, management, finances? I'll be professional in that area. Yeah, that's a good question. I would recommend reading my book. My book is not a business book, but it's a book that gives you a little bit of a history of the World Cup. But in addition, it tells you about the economic impact, the cultural impact. Those things would be helpful. And really, if you pick up my book, for example, and you look at the bibliography, it mentions all the books that I used as research, and that would be a place to look. Another thing you can do very quickly is go on Amazon and look under books and type in soccer business and under books, and you will find many books on the business of soccer and how the game is growing. And I think you'll be able to find some resources there. How do you, as a journalist, prepare to cover such a huge event? Yeah, it's not easy. So that question has multi answers. One being you need to be physically fit to cover the World Cup. You need to be able to walk a lot, have comfortable shoes, go to the gym, really be in good shape. You have to carry a bag with equipment, a laptop, other equipment. I know journalists who carry two laptops because sometimes one of them will break. So you have to carry a lot of weight and you need to be physically fit for a World Cup. So this past summer in the United States, we had the Club World Cup, which was really the first time FIFA had an event that big. It was kind of a dress rehearsal for the World Cup, and it was very hot. And the World Cup will be very hot, very warm in June and July. And it was very difficult to travel with on trains, buses, whatever, with heavy bags in the heat. So light clothing, be in good shape, and be physically fit for the World Cup. And then you need to read a lot. Read about all the countries participating. This year we'll have, in 2026 we'll have 48 teams, which means more teams to know about, more players to learn. So a lot of research, a lot of work, a lot of reading. So I'm already starting to research and do the reading now. So by the time June starts, you already know what's happening. And then, the better teams advance, and then you start to pick up some storylines there. But there's a lot of research and preparation done ahead of time. And it starts a year before, really. And so that's where I am now. Yeah. I have to say, VAR has helped the game because, look, we still remember a time when your team would score a goal and they would call an offside and it wasn't offside, or maybe there was a handball against you, and and you couldn't. There was no recourse. So what would happen is the game would end, you would lose, and then you would blame the referees, right? So VAR has helped remedy that in some ways. There's still controversy, which is the beauty of the sport, that we can still argue about various goals, various plays, various teams. But what VAR has done is it has added time to the game. So the game used to fit in this nice package, 2 hours on television, two 45-minute halves. The clock doesn't stop in soccer, right? 15-minute halftime, and that was it. Now you're seeing at especially in the last two World Cups, you know, not just 3 or 4 minutes of stoppage time, but 9 minutes, 10 minutes, 12 minutes of stoppage time because they had to stop the game to review a goal or a red card or something else, a penalty kick. And that starts to break the momentum of the sport. I don't like that so much. I like that they get the calls right. We want that. Everybody wants that. But I don't like the idea that that you get the 90th minute and the referee says 12 more minutes. And now, and teams are winning games now later when they would have. And then what the players have complained to me about is that if you play three games in the group stage and each game has 10 minutes of stoppage time, well, now you've added 30 extra minutes of time to your burden. That makes players more tired, and that creates fatigue. And tournaments short already. You have to play 7 games to get to a final, right? So that doesn't help physical fitness. It doesn't help the players, right? So there's some good and bad with everything else, but there was bad before too, obviously. Before VAR, now we have some good and some bad. So am I a supporter of it? I like it, but I worry that it can change the game and the flow, and I don't want that to happen. Do you think the Women's World Cup will ever be as popular as the Men's World Cup? We'd like to cover a Women's World Cup. So, will it become as popular? I don't know. I don't think so. I think it will take many, many more years. I have covered Women's World Cups. I covered the 1999 Women's World Cup in the United States, which was very popular. Women's soccer is very popular in the United States. And I covered the 2019 Women's World Cup in France. But I will say there is a very different feel. So in 2018, I was in Russia. I covered the World Cup, and really everywhere you went in Russia, you knew there was a World Cup happening. There was soccer balls hanging on lampposts, flags everywhere. You can tell there was a World Cup happening. In France in 2019, a year later, the Women's World Cup, and I was in Paris, and you did not know the World Cup was happening. You couldn't buy World Cup merchandise anywhere other than the stadiums. You did not know there was a World Cup happening, except for at the games. And that was a different feel, I think, than having a World Cup, a men's World Cup, I should say, dominate your country. And then a women's one doesn't get the same attention. And I hope that it does. I hope it grows because women's soccer is very good. Some countries are pretty amazing at it. The United States has had a long history of being very good at women's soccer. And now you're seeing more European teams getting better at it. You have England, you have Spain, right? France. These are teams that are getting better and better. And then if you watch the women's Euros this summer, very competitive, very high level, a lot of fun to watch. So I hope that it does become on par. But I also have to say the Men's World Cup has had an 80-year, history before there was a Women's World Cup. The first Women's World Cup was 1991, right? The first World Cup for men was 1930. So men have had a huge lead. But I think as things change culturally, I think people are more accepting of women playing football around the world now will help the game for sure. Do I have a football club that I support? So as a journalist, I try to be as neutral as possible, and I am neutral, right? People say, "What's your favorite team?" And I say, I don't really have a favorite team. I like to root for my favorite, for good stories. I like good stories because I want to tell good stories, right? But I told you my parents are from Italy, so I'm not going to lie to you. I do like to root for Italy at the World Cup, and I have rooted for Italy at the World Cup as a young man. Italy has not qualified for the last two World Cups. They may not qualify for this one. So remains to be seen if Italy remains a soccer power. We can talk about that offline. But the club team that I support is Napoli. And maybe you guessed that because of my effusive and positive language about Diego Maradona, who in Naples is still considered a godlike figure, and because of what he did for the team in the 1980s. And if you go to Naples, Italy today, you will see Maradona everywhere on murals, posters. He is immortal. He's big in Argentina. He's even bigger in Naples, Italy. So Napoli is my club team. But like I said, I like to root for really fun stories. That's always the best kind of things to root for. It's like, like at the 2022 World Cup, like, will France play Argentina in the final? And if they do, then it will be Messi versus Mbappe, and that's going to be amazing. And that's what happened, right? And then you had all this, and then at the game itself, you had this duel between the two best players in the world, and then these two teams that would never give up, and it was an amazing game. And that's what you want as a journalist. You want to root for really, really good games, good teams because you want the best. You want to tell the best stories. So that's what I root for. But I understand fans have their own interest in teams they root for. Favorite movie about soccer? There are a lot of bad ones, but the one I would recommend is Victory. It's a movie from the 1960s, I think, and it's about a prisoner of war camp. It's where you have the Nazis play these prisoners, and it features so many amazing players, like real players. And Pele is in this movie, for example. He's an actor in the movie. So, and it features Michael Caine as a British actor, but there's a lot of real life soccer players who played cameos in the movie. So it's amazing. And if you want to see who the goalie for the prisoner of war team, it was Sylvester Stallone. So before he even made Rocky, he was a goalie in this movie. It's very, very young Stallone. If you want to see, it's called Victory. Some in some countries it's called Escape to Victory, but in the United States it's called Victory. I recommend that movie. How are host cities in the US preparing their infrastructure for the 2026 World Cup? So, good question. So, the United States is one of those countries I think can host the World Cup with like a year's notice if they needed to. Not that anybody should do that, because, for example, New York has a wonderful subway system that gets you everywhere. Great hotels, lots of hotel rooms, and stadiums. Because of the NFL, the US has very good stadiums that can be multi-use for soccer. But the way they're preparing in the US is a little different than other countries. Like in Qatar, they were building a lot because they need to build subway train system. They need to build more hotels. In the US, they're not building hotels so much or trains, but they're building up awareness. You need to build awareness for the World Cup. A lot of people don't know what the World Cup is. They don't know that it's coming. So you need to create awareness. So there's a campaign, an advertising campaign in every city to promote the game and the city, and the individual city different tourism. So for example, the New York, New Jersey area is already promoting the World Cup. They've been handing out posters at the Club World Cup final. They were there to promote the game. John Harkes, who's a former U.S. player who's from New Jersey, met with reporters to talk about the World Cup and how excited he was about the World Cup coming. So they're trying to get media coverage for the World Cup a year ahead of time because they want to build awareness. Because the people that love soccer, they love football, they know it's going to happen. They're going to go. They're going to get tickets. The tourists who want to come, they're going to know. But a lot of people don't know the World Cup is coming, and they need to know because they might want to participate. They want to go to a game, but they also need to know because maybe getting around New York won't be so easy, for example, during the World Cup, or maybe getting around Los Angeles won't be so easy. Los Angeles famous for its terrible traffic, right? So so cities are trying to build awareness and also to get an idea, how many people around the world are interested in this? How many visitors are coming? I know, for example, lots of hotels are ready, prepared for visitors, but also Airbnb, right? People that can rent apartments, they want to know, like, can we make money during this time? Well, what's the availability? So the visitors need to know this, and the host cities need to know this, and they need to create awareness. And a lot of it is around tourism, really. I should say it's really mostly around tourism, less around infrastructure. The infrastructure is there; it's just tourism. Now, some cities may not be used to visitors like New York or Los Angeles, so maybe places like Dallas may not be ready, or maybe Kansas City. They're not used to so many visitors at once, but Miami, New York, Los Angeles, they're more than ready. Um, what are some of the political challenges for hosting the World Cup in multiple countries? Yeah, there's always challenges multiple countries politically because of visas. So you need to travel, So generally what the World Cup what FIFA does mostly is create a kind of like a fan card. They've done this for, I want to say maybe Russia 2018 was the first one. So there's no visa requirement. You basically, when you buy tickets to the World Cup, as long as you can prove you bought tickets and show that you bought tickets, you're allowed entry into the country, right? So it eliminates the need for visa paperwork, right? Journalists still need to do some of those things, but visitors don't need to do those things. So I'm guessing the U.S. will do something similar. There already is pretty much, travel between Mexico and the U.S. So Canada and the U.S. is not that difficult. I know that there's been issues with immigration, other crackdowns, but FIFA has assured everyone, and the US government has assured everyone that visitors will be able to come and go during the World Cup. Visas will not be a problem. Teams will be able to come and go during the World Cup. That will not be an issue. So I think in the end, there's a lot of talk about this, but I think when you get down to it, there'll be no challenges politically because I do think these three nations understand they're hosting the World Cup together. They want to make a lot of money. They want to bring in visitors, and they want to put on the best party they can. And so I think really that's really the challenge more than the logistics. I think ultimately, I think it will not be an issue. And I hope there won't be an issue, but I don't think it will be. And FIFA has assured me and other people that it will not be, and I believe them. How were the cities in the US selected? Why Kansas, for example, not Chicago? Yeah, it's a good question. So, I want to say the original list had like 45 cities on it, right? Because every city wants the World Cup, right? So how were they selected? Every city puts out a sort of a bid book, a book that tells you what the positives of having in their city are. So, for example, Chicago wanted the World Cup, and Washington D.C. wanted it, and so did Las Vegas and some other cities. But you can't have the World Cup everywhere, and you want to be able to spread it out to enough cities that people can travel, enough places around the country. And I think ultimately when it came down to Chicago or Kansas City, I think the issue was, well, we need a city in the Midwest, at least one, maybe not more than one, but one. And so Kansas City is an interesting city because there's an MLS team there. It's done very well in terms of attendance, and interest in soccer has grown a lot in the Midwest, especially in places like Kansas. And I think it was a chance for the organizers to say, look, let's have the World Cup in a city that really will never ever really get a chance to host a massive event like this. They're not going to host an Olympics. They won't host a Super Bowl. Like they won't host a big event. Let's give them a World Cup, group. Let's them have host a few World Cup games. And Chicago's an international city. Chicago's hosted, many sporting events. And so maybe that was the thinking behind why one over another. But I think in the case of these two cities, it was really a matter of, do we pick a city that is, one city in the Midwest? And when I say Midwest, I mean the middle of the country, the middle of the United States, because you have teams on the East Coast, teams on the West Coast. It's like, we only really need one in the Midwest. Let's pick Kansas. It's different. I should say, just in general, the cities were chosen because, you have to have a New York, you have to have a Los Angeles, you have to have Miami, right? These are international cities. You have to have, and they have the infrastructure. They have a great stadium. They have, a great system, and they have great fans. So you want to have it there, and visitors want to go to those cities. But I remember the biggest fight was really between who would host the World Cup final, and really up until the very last minute, everyone thought it was going to be Dallas, right? Dallas having this amazing stadium. If you ever watch a Dallas Cowboys football game, they have an amazing stadium. They have an MLS team, but it's not, they don't play in that same stadium. Really state of the art. Dallas being a big city, could they host the World Cup? Sure, they could. But I think FIFA could not get away from the allure of New York. New York is an international city, city I grew up in, city I was raised in, city I live in now. I was very happy to see New York have the World Cup. You really, when the World Cup was hosted in '94, it was hosted in near Los Angeles, Pasadena, at the Rose Bowl, because it's a massive venue. It's 100,000 seats, amazing stadium. But so you couldn't have it in Los Angeles again. So really, it was a fight between, would you have it in Dallas and New York? I think New York is a better choice because New York is a global city. The United Nations is here. People from all over the world are here. I said FIFA has 209 members. 209 different nationalities live in New York, if not more, right? So New York is the premier international city, has the hotels. FIFA now has an office here in New York at Trump Tower. So FIFA is very invested in New York, I think. And they had the Club World Cup final was held here, that I attended, between Chelsea and Paris Saint-Germain. Full stadium, and really the logistics for the World Cup final were being made this past summer. So New York has a lot of experience with big events, and I think they'll do a great job. What will fan experiences in America and stadiums be like compared to Russia or Europe or South America? I think they'll be similar in that the visitors that are coming from other countries will bring that with them, but I do think that in Europe and in South America, the fans are very passionate, and it will be very difficult maybe to equate that. But I think a World Cup, you're able to do that. I think you're able to bring that passion to it, because not just you'll have the fans that live in the United States who will attend the games, but you'll have fans coming from all over the world. For example, when I was in Qatar, there were so many Argentina fans in Qatar, especially for the last 2 weeks of the tournament, that at the final it felt like you were in Buenos Aires. It felt like you were in Argentina. And then you had all these neutral fans, people from India, Bangladesh, people from all over the Middle East that traveled to Qatar, and they were Argentina fans. So the atmosphere was electric, and it didn't matter that it wasn't being held in Buenos Aires. It was the passion was there because the fans bring the passion. It's not the stadium, it's not the building, it's not the location. It's it's the fans that fill it. So I think American, you watch American soccer, you watch MLS, maybe the passion is not quite the same as you see in Europe, but at the World Cup, I think you'll see it. So it'll be equal, if not the same. Do you think the World Cup will finally make soccer a mainstream sport in the US? I think soccer is a mainstream sport in the US, but it's not the number one sport. I would say the number one sport in the US is the NFL, the National Football League, American football, as it's known in other parts of the world. Then you have baseball, basketball, the NBA is known around the world, the NBA. And then you have the National Hockey League. Hockey is big in Canada, but it's big in the United States, especially in places like New York and Chicago and Boston. And soccer, I'd say, is fifth, fourth or fifth on this list, right? Can it grow bigger than that? It will be difficult. I think Americans love a big event. They love the World Cup. They love the Olympics. They'll watch Olympic hockey. They'll watch World Cup soccer. But will they watch every week? Will they watch their local MLS team? Will they watch, they watch if Real Madrid comes to New York, for example, they'll go to that game, but can sustain itself long term. I think the American fan will always have lots of choices, and that's good and bad for American soccer because you have this situation where you have your local Major League Soccer team, but you might want to stay home and watch Liverpool because you like Liverpool, and it's a better level of soccer compared to, for example, what you get here locally. So will it become mainstream? It's become more and more mainstream. Will it become? The better question is, will it become the most popular sport in America? Will it become in the top two or three? And I don't think that's going to happen after this World Cup. Will happen in 30 years from now. Maybe you see much more young people, younger generation interested in soccer, and that's helpful. They're growing up with soccer. When I grew up in the United States with there was very little soccer, if none, right? And now kids are growing up with a lot of soccer on television, at home, in their stadiums. So maybe 30 more years, maybe in 30 years from now, we'll say, oh, soccer is the number one sport in America, but the World Cup will help it, but it won't decide that. It's a very, very slow process. It takes many, many, many years. Any other questions? These are all good questions. I really appreciate the time uh, you've taken to host me and also to ask lots of great questions. It's been an amazing hour. It's gone by very quickly. I love to talk about football, talk about soccer. If you get the chance, buy my book, History of the World Cup. It'll be a great, great resource for the next World Cup. And thank you for your time and talk to you soon.